Thank you for joining us for this webinar sponsored by the Race, Politics, and Policy Center at George Mason University. I'm Michael Fontra, the founding director of the center. The center is dedicated to producing research and events that examine the many ways in which race and politics intersect and impact public policy. I invite you to visit our website, rppc.char.gmu.edu. That's rppc.schar.gmu.edu, where you can view our past public events and learn a little more about what it is that we do and aspire to do. You can also follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is at RPPCGMU. Also, when you're on our website, be sure to join our mailing list, and you can, again, enjoy some of our video archives. You can see my conversation with Cornel West, a presentation on race and the crisis of civic democracy, featuring Professor Christopher Sebastian Parker of the University of California at Santa Barbara, and Professor Keisha Middlemass of Howard University, who detailed and discussed the public policy created barriers to successful ex-prisoner reentry. Today's focus, though, is specific to Virginia, but we will touch on a few national issues as time allows. From Jamestown to Thomas Jefferson, from the capital of the Confederacy to lynching, from Prince Edward County to Loving, and from the first elected Black governor in America to the Unite the Right rally, the Commonwealth of Virginia has long sat at the core of America's racial story. And as we look forward to the November elections, we at the Race, Politics, and Policy Center thought it would be useful to situate the Commonwealth more firmly in our national discussion on race and politics. The Commonwealth has undergone a notable political evolution that has moved the state from solidly conservative to much more competitive for both parties. And so we want to get into some of that today. And you can help us by joining the discussion with your questions, which can be added at the Q&A button, which you see at the bottom of the screen. I will pose them as we move through the conversation. Virginia State Senator Mamie Locke is here to give us some food for thought on all of this. She represents District 23, which includes the city of Hampton and parts of Newport News. She chairs the Rules Committee and serves on the Commerce and Labor Committee, the Education and Health Committee, Finance and Appropriations Committee, and the General Laws and Technology Committee. She has been a member of the Senate since 2004, having previously served as mayor, vice mayor, and a city council member for Hampton. She is a graduate of Tougaloo College and earned an MA and PhD degrees at Atlanta University. I want to declare up front that this may be a different kind of conversation for me. In a way, I feel like I'm about to go back to school. That's because Senator Locke was a professor of mine at Hampton University. I took many, many courses from her and learned a great deal. So please forgive me if I sound a little familiar at times. I'm trying to keep it professional, Senator Locke. So let me just start by saying thank you very much for joining me. I've been hoping for quite some time that we can do this, and I'm glad that we finally did. So thank you very much for doing this.
And thank you. I wanted to say Michael, but I'm going to be professional as well. Professor Fauntleroy, for having me here this evening, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure joining you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's get right to it. You grew up in Mississippi. You've been in Virginia since the start of your career as a college professor. You were here as Doug Wilder made his way to statewide and national prominence. You've seen more than a few things in Virginia. And so the first question is, what is your assessment of what you see right now at this intersection of race and politics in Virginia, and how, for example, has it changed over the course of the last couple of decades or so?
That's a very good question, and I've observed quite a bit in my time here in the Commonwealth, and I've actually lived here longer than I lived in Mississippi. I was actually at Governor Wilder's inauguration, and that was a very historic event, and one that many of us heralded as a breaking point for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And in many ways it was, but it was not such a breaking point that it threw Virginia into what would become Blue Virginia, because it did not, because Virginia did not become that kind of beacon of liberalism in any kind of way, simply because of an African-American governor named Wilder. And because things suddenly started to change in Virginia, even then, as its legislature changed. Its legislature changed from being Democratic to very solidly Republican, for many, many years. And it took a lot to move the needle and the pendulums to swing back and forth between who would hold leadership roles in that legislature over time. So, and it was not until, I got to the legislature in 2004 when Tim Kaine was lieutenant governor and Mark Warner was governor. So it was a time when the governor, LG, were Democrats, but the legislative branch was Republican. So one could see kind of the push and pull of policy making in terms of how policies were made with it was a difficult process because you have the legislative branch kind of pushing against the executive branch simply because of who was in that office versus do we really want to make good policy. But an interesting thing happened that my first year there. It was when Governor Warner wanted to raise taxes. And he wanted to raise taxes, he wanted to raise the sales tax, primarily to place that tax on for education purposes. That is, we needed to do some more things for K-12. And I remember the session running long. That is beyond it was an even year, so beyond the 60-day window that we normally would have been there. And I remember very distinctly that there were 17 Republicans in the House who were wavering on whether or not to support that package. And I don't think that the focus was so much on the Senate as it was on the House. And those 17 Republicans, and whether or not they were going to break and vote for that tax increase. And ultimately they did. And If anyone out there knows anything about Virginia politics, you know that the speaker controls practically, well, not practically, everything in the House. And those 17 folks were punished for having voted with the governor. But at the end of the day, they did the right thing. Because at the end of the day, the purpose for that tax increase was for K-12 education. And they wanted to do the right thing at that right time with Governor Woon. And that was the one thing I remember my first year in the Senate was all focus was on a tax increase. Are these 17 Republicans in the House going to break with their party and vote for this tax increase? All attention was taken away from what the tax increase was for. It was all about, are you going to vote for a tax increase? And of course, since that time, things have gone back and forth, back and forth. In my second run in 2007, I was elected, the Democrats took over the Senate. So, which was an interesting thing in and of itself. I remember Dick Saslaw, if anybody out there remembers Senator Saslaw, who was then minority leader when I came in, became majority leader because the Democrats took over the Senate, saying to me, you know, you've been in here one election cycle and you're becoming a committee chair. And it was because of that one election cycle, I become a committee chair simply because you all put me on to what you thought was a nothing committee. And I got seniority on that nothing committee. Mm-hmm. So, and it was interesting that for Democrats, I believe out of the 11 committees, 7 of those committees were headed by women.
Okay.
So gender was an issue. And of those 11 committees, I believe 4 were also headed by African Americans. So you could see the difference in one election cycle between the parties, because just prior to that, 1 year prior, all 11 standing committees were headed by white men.
So this is a really great jumping off point for me, because whenever I'm in the classroom, during the course of the semester, I use Virginia as a case study on sort of how things can change in terms of race, and education is the example I always go to. For those of you who don't know, Prince Edward County in Virginia literally shut down their public schools for years rather than comply with the Brown versus Board of Education decision handed down by the Supreme Court. Right? This was a recalcitrant state when it came to race. And it's difficult for people in 2024 to see Virginia that way. But in some respects, back in the days, as we say, right? Virginia was every bit as virulent on questions of race as the Deep South. And remember, Richmond was the capital of Confederacy. And for a lot of people, the joke is there's still people in Virginia, as in other parts of the South, that in some ways are still fighting the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And the interesting part of that from a public policy perspective is sometimes those viewpoints are reflected in people's policy positions to vote for or against a certain bill or provision because it fits in with their personal worldview, regardless of the quality of the legislation, as you just mentioned, with regard to the tax increase.
It's interesting that you mentioned Prince Edward County, because we had a piece of legislation to remove the statue of Harry Byrd from the Capitol grounds because the statue was there and on the Capitol grounds, and he was the architect of massive resistance. And one of the reasons why the legislation went in to actually have his statue removed was because he was that architect of massive resistance. And why should he have a place that was prominent on the Capitol grounds when this was the person who took the charge to lead massive resistance in the Commonwealth? But
So,
there were still those who stood up and said, why are we removing Harry Byrd?
this is fascinating to me, right? Because for those of you who have not driven down Monument Avenue in Richmond, it literally was an outdoor museum to white supremacy and the Confederacy. And so I'm always fascinated by the argument for keeping those statues. I know a lot of people got focused on what was going on in South Carolina for a period, and Virginia certainly got its share of attention. But take us to that period. I mean, what's the argument for keeping those statues up?
Part of the argument was, for historical heritage purposes, and but one has to understand when those statues went up. They did not go up in the aftermath of the Civil War, or even in the aftermath of Reconstruction. Many of those things went up as, as a response to the civil rights movement. So we aren't talking about paying homage to one's heritage as it relates to the Civil War, or even in response to Reconstruction. We're talking paying homage to the lost cause, primarily because we're angry about the ending of resistance against an era, which is essentially Jim Crow. So it's not as though folks are really that enamored with their ancestors and their heritage so much that then those things would have gone up immediately following the era, when in fact they did not. Much of that went up in direct response to the oncoming civil rights movement and the civil rights era. And so the whole point of, if you want to pay homage to history and heritage, then statues belong in a museum, not on an entire street being paid for with taxpayer dollars.
So in another example of how Virginia has changed, of course, those statues have been brought down. And growing up in Washington, D.C., the Potomac River in some ways might as well have been the Atlantic Ocean, because there was not a lot for me growing up as a kid in D.C. to really, want to go across the river, notwithstanding the fact that some of my family lived in Warrenton before moving to the district. And in fact, I should just point out my brother and his family live in Chesapeake right now. And so Virginia's always been very important and interesting to me. And so the racial dynamics of which I've been long aware have been an interest area for me. And one change that I have detected, and I need to make sure I'm correct in this, so I'm raising it here, is that the traditional black-white paradigm that we've sort of grown up with, for those of us of a certain age and certain experiences, has shifted into a much more multiracial paradigm. And I'm just curious, how do you see that? How is it reflected in public policy in Richmond? And what should we know about that?
I don't think that the shift has been as great as we would like to see it. Unfortunately, what we're seeing, I believe, is particularly in the policy dynamic, is a backwards move. in many ways.
Mhm.
Particularly when it comes to addressing issues of trying to talk about voting rights, or if we want to talk about gender issues, or if we even want to talk about, racial issues. Because in the past, I would say, uh, 5 or 6 years, we've had to deal with, I would even go farther back than that. I would go back to the election of President Obama. And there has been a backlash to that election. And as a consequence of that election, to and I think in the immediate aftermath, what we began to see, and just in not just in Virginia, but across many states, but in Virginia, the response was, "Oh, there must have been some voter fraud going on. So because there was some voter fraud going on, we need to address it. So in order to address that voter fraud, then we need to put in place some voter ID laws." So that was one of the immediate responses back in about 2012, 2013.
Mhm.
Virginia passed a photo ID law. And also began to address some other issues as it related to so-called voter fraud. Although there was no evidence ever given of any voter fraud having happened in Virginia.
Mhm.
And then there was also responses to parole. One, eliminating parole to begin with, and then making it very, very difficult for individuals to even get parole by first eliminating earned sentence credits, and then making it very, very difficult for individuals to even get earned sentence credits, and making it difficult for reentry, uh, to happen for individuals. And now, even though it wasn't as problematic with Governors Northam and McCullough, it is very, very difficult for individuals to have their rights restored. And Virginia is probably the last state where the governor has to restore an individual's rights.
Mhm.
And right now, it is the process is not transparent as to how that happens. So I see us retrogressing in many ways on a lot of issues related to policy. And and we've been kind of fighting this uphill battle on a number of those, and one of the most difficult ones to handle is gun violence. We, as a legislature, we have not been able to get a handle on, and we've seen this at the national level too, so it's not just us here in Virginia, to get legislation passed to wrap our arms around the whole issue of gun violence. We can't get legislation passed banning assault weapons, banning even banning having individuals carrying guns around polling places, or a 5-day waiting period. And that whole idea surfaced because the guy who did the mass shooting at the Chesapeake Walmart
Mhm.
bought his gun that morning. So it's like, okay, so what's up with the 5-day waiting period? We're still dealing with the red flag laws, and issues of mental illness. So it's like, well, we may take one step forward on some issues and then we're taking 5 backwards, or not taking any steps at all. And in the area of education, the pandemic came, and then we have an administration that says, oh, because we closed our schools, that's why we're having a problem with a disruption in learning. No, the learning gap was there before the pandemic. So we can't blame the pandemic for the achievement gap. We can blame the pandemic for exacerbating what was already a problem, but we can't blame it for causing it. But we can blame the administration for not trying to solve the problem or trying to figure out how we can better solve the problem. So I can't say that there is any real I think I got away from what your original question was, but
so let me just jump in on the voting rights piece and the gun control piece, gun safety piece. So as I understand it, you all in the assembly this past session tried to do some things on those issues. What are some of the issues? What are some of the ideas that you all are putting forward, and what's the next step from here?
We tried to kind of shore up some of the voting issues because we got quite a bit done back in 2020. And we tried to, one of the main things was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center that several states had become a party to. And it actually was started back when Governor McDonald was in office, and he was one of the individuals who helped start ERIC. And it's a data sharing center to help secure data with voting.
If I understand it correctly, one of the really key parts of that system was to make it easier to verify whether somebody lived in a particular state and wasn't registered in a different state. Correct. Okay.
Right. But Governor Youngkin removed Virginia from ERIC. But if we want to run on a campaign of securing our vote, that seems a little bit hypocritical to removing Virginia from ERIC and securing one's vote. So we had a piece of legislation that basically tried to require or to put Virginia back in ERIC. That legislation was vetoed. And there was an effort to expand the type of voter identification that one could have. Remember, Virginia goes back to 2012, 2013 with wanting photo ID. And so this legislation basically would have required allowing one of the acceptable forms of ID as because many employers have individuals to have photo identification for their place of employment. And that piece of legislation basically said that could be allowed as an acceptable form of identification for voting. And so that was vetoed. And
so one of the ID law in particular, as it varies from state to state, is really curious to me, because it really does highlight in some respects how unserious some of these laws can be. I think in North Carolina, it's still the case that students can't use IDs from state universities, public institutions,
Right.
as a form of
Well,
ID. But there may be some other state issued IDs, hunting licenses and the like, that
right.
can be used. What is the rule in Virginia with regard to state university identification for voting?
Let me tell you what can be used. One can use a utility bill, a bank statement, a government check, any other government document that has someone's name and address on it. You can use your driver's license, or Virginia has what's known as a Virginia voter photo identification card that can be issued to you for free. It doesn't cost anything, so you can get one of those. But I don't think students can use their student ID.
Mhm. Okay, well, so anything else on voting from the most recent session that we should know about?
I think that there were a couple of other things, such as folks not being able to have guns at polling places.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember what happened. I think that was vetoed. And some other pieces dealing with challenges to the qualifications of someone, but those were not as, I mean, all of them were serious pieces,
Mhm.
but the major ones were dealing with Eric and dealing with the photo identifications of forms of identification for voting. But there were a number of bills dealing with gun violence, like the boyfriend bill, that it and that if someone's partner had a restraining order or had committed violence against the partner, that person could not get access to a weapon. That was vetoed, because with the rationale that you are denying a person the lawful right to a gun. Help me understand it.
Now this is part of a larger issue that I see, and I hope you can shed some light on it for me as an educator. You're an educator, and one of the areas that I'm seeing much more impact in terms of state level public policy, not just in Virginia, but in states across the country, is around, civics education on racial issues, K through 12, DEI, just our usual basic fundamental facts around around what I call a 360-degree look at race. And in my view, at least, we are getting further away from that than I'd like to see. And I'm worried about it in part because, as you know, poorly informed children become poorly informed adults
right.
and poorly informed voters, right? Which has all manner of impact on public policy. And as you know, Governor Youngkin has recently issued an edict of some sort regarding courses taught at Virginia Commonwealth University and also George Mason University around, broadly speaking, race and politics, or race in civic life. What are you seeing there? What do you think we need to know that might not yet be widely known?
You can look for an op-ed that should be coming from me shortly on this.
Okay.
Because it is because I taught in higher education for too many years to count, that I'm taking this personally. that why does the governor or the Department of Education need the syllabi of an institution of higher education? What are you going to do with it? And why is the administration interfering in academic freedom of institutions? And in a lane where they do not need to travel. First and foremost, even I, having been an academic administrator, knowing curriculum, understanding the process by which courses are adopted, the rigor that courses have to go through to get to the point where they have to get to, will not even deign to think that I know what a physics professor needs to teach. That's not my lane. And I also don't believe that it is the responsibility of the governor's office, and certainly not the responsibility of the Secretary of Education to determine what goes in a syllabi at any institution of higher education in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I am particularly perturbed by the fact that what you are requesting is in a specific area of inquiry, DEI and racial literacy, which says to me that you have an agenda. And it's the same agenda that you've had since day one, which is a dislike for non-existence critical race theory, which was never taught at K through 12 anyway. Creating tip lines for K through 12 teachers, which is running our teachers out of public education in droves. It is also, so it was only a matter of time before this spilled over to higher education. So that is now that time that it is spilling over into higher education. This agenda to say to those in higher education, we don't, because what I saw in the Chronicle of our higher education is that the reason why these things are being asked for is because those of you in the professoriate, and myself included, since I still teach, here and there, is that we are imposing upon students our left-wing politics and indoctrinating them with this left-wing politics. So we want to make sure that that is not what is happening by looking at your syllabi. But you're not asking for all syllabi. You're only asking for certain syllabi from 2 institutions. So one has to question your rationale for that.
So I, at the risk of personalizing this, I should let you know that I'm launching a course on race and American politics this fall.
So your
And
syllabi is probably one of them.
I was hoping you could tell me otherwise, but to your point, as professors spend years and years and years trying to get up to speed on the topics they teach. And while none of us know everything, we know enough that, our viewpoints and our perspectives and our knowledge of the particular topic matter, ought to be respected at some level. And, I haven't talked to my colleagues about this in any real detail, but it's certainly a matter of a concern, because it could theoretically have a chilling effect on, hiring of future professors, right? We saw what happened in Florida, when Governor DeSantis made his move on the new school, the new college of Florida, and
Right.
professors left. And so, so it's certainly something that bears watching and some measure of vigilance.
Absolutely, it does. And the American Association of University Professors has taken out a very strong statement. They didn't put Virginia in this group because I think this happened after they issued the statement on the intrusion of politics into the American classroom in this way, and into trying to determine what is taught, what is said, and what is learned is not the purview of gubernatorial administrations. And if we're going, and this is the wrong road down which to go. And I would point you to a recent editorial that was in the Virginian Pilot just this past weekend, and they used the very same words that you use. That this is a chilling effect. If this is the road that one wants to go down, that this is certainly not what we want to do.
So let's shift to some national stuff. I'm really interested in getting your perspective on what's happening nationally. As you know, there's a presidential election in November. There's a lot of talk about the choices that we have, and now we have, at least at this point, at least one viable third-party candidate. And today, Cornel West, an independent candidate, announced that Professor Melina Abdullah from Cal State Los Angeles, and a Black Lives Matter organizer, founder of the LA chapter, and activist, is going to be his running mate. So I'm curious, what's your assessment of the election right now? And what do you make of this polling that shows that President Biden is losing support among Black voters?
I believe that it's not, it may not necessarily be President Biden losing support among Black voters. I believe it's a Democratic Party losing support among Black voters.
Okay.
And I've been saying that for a minute.
Okay.
Nobody's listening to me, but I've been saying it for a minute. And that the Democratic Party has been taking the Black voter for granted for years, and with the assumption that Black voters are going to support us anyway, because there's no alternative to what we can do for Black people. And I think that assumption that somehow the Democratic Party is the savior of Black people is quickly losing ground. And because the Black voter is becoming more of an educated voter on what it is that's needed in the African American community, what's needed by the voter himself or herself. And I don't think that Black folks are going to go out and vote en masse for a Donald Trump. And what they did in 2016 was either to write in a candidate or stay at home.
But if that happens again this go round, then Donald Trump will be the president,
like he was in 2016.
right?
And I told folks, and I've been telling folks in our party, it's not enough to show up at somebody's church in the election year, and say, here I am, vote for me, and then they'd never see you again until the next election cycle, because you need to start demonstrating to this community who you think is your loyal voter why they need to be loyal to you. Because you're not showing why you need the support and why Black voters need to be loyal to you. because you're not showing why they need to be. Because I don't think it's so much Biden himself
Mhm.
as it is the party is losing the support.
So as it pertains to this November election, you know, I know there are third-party candidates who are running, but in the end, as you know, it's either going to be Trump or Biden.
Right.
So what would you like to see the party doing both in Virginia and nationally to shore up support from Black voters? And what is it that you think the Republican Party could do to generate more than its generally tiny proportion of Black voters?
I don't think that the Republican Party is going to get more than the smaller percentage that it normally has, because it tends to recruit different kinds of candidates, and candidates that are speaking the language of the head of their party.
Mm-hmm.
And if they continue to recruit those kinds of candidates, they're not going to be able to recruit African American voters in any kind of substantive numbers. Because if they recruit candidates who continue to spout off the same way that Donald Trump spouts off, they're not going to get significant numbers of African American voters, at least not at the ground level, not at the city council levels or state level or anything along those lines.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and have some suspicions about the polling at this stage of the race. I just don't think we can be certain. There's too many things that can happen between now and November that can throw the race into a tailspin. But as you recall, you know, when Ronald Reagan won the White House in 1980, there was a whole bunch of people trying to emulate Reagan's success at various parts of the electorate across the country. And there was also an effort to, for lack of a better phrase, sort of prop up Black conservative voices. You remember the Fairmont Conference
Right, yeah.
in San Francisco right after Reagan was elected, and there was an attempt to position Black conservative voices and activists as alternatives to what we refer to as a sort of traditional Black civil rights based leadership. And that was then. Now I'm not seeing any of that from the Republicans. What I am seeing, though, is, and we see this in North Carolina with the Republican gubernatorial nominee, I seem to see Black conservatives who are literally trying to emulate Trump.
Right.
Do you see any of that in Virginia? And what do you make of it?
Oh, yeah. What you're getting are the exact same kind of, if they're African American, they are Trump conservatives, spilling the same stuff, speaking the same language. There's very little difference other than the Black skin. And the only way they are elected into office is because they have an R behind their name, and they're in a gerrymandered district. And they somehow got into, they escaped a primary, and they got onto a general election ballot. There's no difference between that African American Republican candidate and a right wing Marjorie Taylor Greene. No, very little difference. And Ronald Reagan would not be welcome in this party. You know,
and that's saying something, because when he was elected in 1980, he was viewed by many people as the most conservative president in years, and And you're right. I mean, he and Nixon, can you imagine Gerald Ford trying to get that nomination right now?
Never, ever.
You know? So we're gonna go to questions in a minute. If you have any, you can
Sure.
put them in the Q&A section while I pose a few more questions here to Senator Locke. Again, on the national stage, on issues that could impact the November elections, not just for the White House, but also for control of the Senate and control of the House, both of which are up for grabs at this point. The Arizona Supreme Court ruled yesterday, or what's today, Wednesday, Monday, I think, that a 164-year-old law that was passed before Arizona became a part of the United States regarding abortion effectively outlaws it in all cases except for saving the life of the mother. And when I read it, I initially thought, wow, the Arizona Supreme Court just gave Arizona to Biden in November, because this is the kind of thing that, in my view, would juice turnout among folks who are angry at that decision. How do you see it? And is there anything else that we need to be thinking about with regard to that decision?
I think that Republicans can't read tea leaves, and they have not understood since the Dobbs decision how debilitating that decision and overturning of Roe has been for them. Come on, Kansas, putting a constitutional amendment on the books, enshrining the right to an abortion. Ohio, so they don't understand the impact that overturning Roe has had on their party. Just this past election in Virginia, the Republican Party hitched its wagon to a 15-week abortion ban, saying, okay, this is a middle of the road position for us. It's not an outright ban. It's not quite where Roe was. This is a good position for us to take. Then you're not hearing what we're hearing on the doors when we go knocking. And what women are saying to us. Where do you stand on the right for a woman to choose? Where do you stand on this issue? And particularly, which is what was really interesting to me, was older women, and by older women, I mean women my age and older, who would say, I'm not going back to what it was when I was young. I'm not going back there for either me or for my daughter or my grandchildren. I'm not going back there. And anyone who is supporting any kind of bans, whatever week you want to put on it, will not have my support.
And even now, there seems to be some tension within the Republican Party on this question, because there's still folks who want a federal ban. And then former President Trump issues this video in which he doesn't even mention a federal ban, and apparently announced today that he wouldn't sign one if he did, which essentially undercuts the legs of many of the activists around the country who want to push for a national ban. And so the party has to, I want to say they have to figure it out, but I'm not sure that you can figure it out if you're on the side of the issue that has lost every single special election since Dobbs.
Right. I mean, and if you don't get it, if you don't understand that you have lost these elections on this one issue alone. And you're absolutely right. What happened in Arizona, they're going to get that initiative on the ballot. I believe they did get it on the ballot in Florida.
Mhm.
Where in this Gen Zers have lost a right.
Mhm.
They lost a right that they've had all their lives. And I believe that this is a motivating factor for many of them.
Mhm.
It's certainly a motivating factor for many women in my age group, and
Mhm.
certainly for millennials. And so if decisions are continually made, like the one that was just made in Arizona, I said, continue, keep making those decisions because it certainly helps.
Right.
Elect folks like, it will help re-elect the president, and it will continue to help folks up and down the ballot with a D
Right.
behind their name.
So, as you know, in American politics, there are certain phrases, certain words that are used as sort of weapons. And I'm thinking primarily as weapons against African Americans. I teach a course on the presidency and try to weave in certain case studies to bring some of that to life. And so whether it was in the 80s and it was a welfare queen, or, more recently talking about critical race theory and DEI and these kinds of things, which from my perspective are intended to sort of agitate and scare voters to move in a direction that they don't even necessarily carefully follow. But I'm wondering, as you move through the Commonwealth and perhaps in conversations with your colleagues in state legislatures around the country, what is being said about the way in which critical race theory and DEI have been weaponized in recent years for electoral purposes?
They're dog whistles, and um, and we know that they're dog whistles, and we see them playing out in legislatures across the country. We saw it. We see it most, of course, in Florida, in Texas, in Alabama, and the only reason it hasn't been as bad here in Virginia is because the legislature's been able to block a number of things that have been proposed. But these are the whole DEI, critical race theory, abortion issues. All of these are part of the culture war that was exacerbated by Donald Trump becoming president, and him actually saying to many of the folks out there who are perpetuating much of this that it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
That it was okay for the folks to march on Charlottesville, and that it was okay for people to even sometimes not even use the dog whistle, to just come right out and say, the racial epithet or whatever, or to burn down a synagogue, or to burn down, a mosque, or to do whatever it is that was antithetical to whatever was their political belief, or that's your enemy. Anything that was not American, despite the fact that you are harping on other Americans. And we all see it. you know, in every meeting that I go to, that's all a part of the discussion about these issues of how this country has devolved in so many ways to you know, being folks not even being able to discuss issues in a way where they're being cordial to each other about these issues, that it's come down to very, very partisan politics and not even being able to work with each other across the aisle necessarily. That issues are either black or white, you know, is D or R. That there is no middle ground. And I, what was, oh, it was Tennessee, that just passed the law, where teachers are allowed to carry guns. And so I mean, so, you know, what's next? That, that our country is, you know, moving in a direction, that is not, conducive to any kind of conversation, that's cordial, or one where we feel that we can engage in getting to mutual ground.
Mhm. So you mentioned Charlottesville, and we're running up on time, and I want to close on this. As you know, voters, people generally, we have short memories, right? And this summer will mark the 7-year anniversary of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And there are a number of undergraduate students who are watching us right now, although we have a variety of other people watching us right now as well. But if you were in the 5th or 6th grade in 2017, this really may not even be on your radar, right? And you were in the state Senate when this happened. Take us back to that period. And, you know, as we sort of intersect this with, you know, race and politics and public policy, we know that there was a thick, deep vein of racial antagonism that was a part of the rally call to begin with.
Right.
You know, and so, you know, take us back to 2017 and what that was like.
I believe that part of how it even came about or why it even happened started with that trip down that escalator in 2015 or whenever he took it. And with saying that, you know, being able to openly communicate, you know, racial animosity is okay and acceptable. And that being able to be anti-Semitic openly and is okay. And that had been communicated both as a dog whistle and in many ways in an open way to those very folks who decided that they were going to use the University of Virginia as their place to make that message known.
Mhm.
And so I don't think that it was an accident that it happened. And then for the President of the United States to say that there were good people on both sides. There are no good people carrying tiki torches, you know, and swastikas.
Mhm.
And, and killing people and killing someone died, but, but for him to, in many ways, condone the act, which he did, he condoned the act, said to others, it's okay to do this.
Mhm. Well, in that way, it has accelerated the coarsening of our public discourse
Mhm.
generally. And so, uh, again, if you're a 19-year-old sophomore right now, you don't have any real recollection of that period, and it's not likely to show up in a lot of K through 12 civics books.
Right, not at all, not now.
In substantial ways. So we're going to bring this to a close, but before we do, I just want to make a couple quick announcements. One of which is, for those of you who are with us now, please make sure you get on our mailing list. We are doing this fall a big conference commemorating the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that'll be in September. And in October, we're going to do a large election roundtable focused on minority voters, so-called minority voters, and where are experts that we will assemble so to see those voters breaking. And that's going to take place just before the election in late October. Senator Locke, thank you very much. Megan Thomas, thank you very much. Thank you all to everyone who joined us this evening. I'm so happy to see some of the names in the chat, including a kid named Brett F., who may or may not be my son. I'm surprised to see him here. So anyway, thank you very much. I'm really grateful to you for taking the time and look forward to connecting with you again soon.
All right,
Good
thank
night,
you so very
everybody.
much.
Have a good evening.